How the top 1% actually think about money. The psychology Wall Street doesn't teach you. In 1970, a young hedge fund analyst asked one of the wealthiest men in America a simple question. What's the one thing you know that I don't? The man didn't talk about stock picks. He didn't mention a secret formula. He said one sentence that the analyst wrote down and carried with him for the rest of his career. I am not afraid to be wrong for a long time. That's it. No insider information. No hidden loophole. Just a different relationship with time, risk, and his own ego than almost everyone else on Wall Street. Here's what's strange. We teach people how to budget. We teach them how to open a brokerage account. We teach them the mechanics of compound interest. But almost nobody teaches the actual psychology that separates people who build lasting wealth from people who stay financially average their entire lives, even when they earn the same income. Today we're going to fix that. We're going to break down the specific mental models the wealthy use. Not motivational nonsense, but documented, researched, historically verified patterns of thinking. And then we're going to look at how these patterns played out in real history, from Rockefeller to modern venture capital. And by the end, you'll have a practical framework you can start applying this week. Let's get into it. The 5 mindset shifts. Before we look at money itself, we need to look at how wealthy individuals think about 4 things differently: risk, time, identity, and information. Researchers who study high net worth decision making, from behavioral economists like Daniel Kahneman to wealth psychologists who've interviewed hundreds of self-made millionaires, keep finding the same 5 patterns. Let's go through them one at a time. Shift 1. Asymmetric risk thinking. Most people think about risk in binary terms, safe or dangerous. Wealthy individuals think about risk in terms of asymmetry. How much can I lose versus how much can I gain? Here's a simple way to understand it. Imagine 2 options. Option A, you can lose $100 or gain $110. Option B, you can lose $1,000 or gain $50,000. Most people's instinct is to avoid option B because the potential loss feels scarier. But mathematically, option B is a dramatically better bet if the odds of losing are the same in both cases, because the upside so wildly outweighs the downside. This is the thinking behind early-stage investing, entrepreneurship, and even career moves. The wealthy aren't reckless. They're actually more careful about risk than most people. But they've reframed the question. Instead of asking, can I afford to lose this? They ask, what's the ratio between what I could lose and what I could gain? And can I survive the downside? Psychologically, this requires tolerating short-term discomfort, the same discomfort that makes most people choose the safe option that quietly guarantees mediocre outcomes over 40 years. Shift 2. Time horizon. Extension. The second shift is about time. Most financial decisions people make are optimized for the next paycheck, the next month, or the next year. Wealthy individuals, and more specifically, the ones who build multi-generational wealth, think in decades. This isn't just a nice idea. It's measurable. Studies on delayed gratification, going back to the famous marshmallow experiments, found that the ability to wait for a larger future reward instead of taking a smaller immediate one correlates with long-term life outcomes, including financial ones. But here's the psychological trick most people miss. It's not that wealthy people have superhuman patience. It's that they've restructured their environment and their identity so that patience is the path of least resistance. If your entire self-image is built around, I am someone who is building something over 20 years, then not touching your investment portfolio during a downturn doesn't take willpower. It takes almost nothing, because panic selling would conflict with who you believe you are. Compare that to someone who sees investing as trying to get rich quickly. Every dip in the market threatens their entire self-concept, so they sell in fear, usually at the worst possible time. Shift 3. Opportunity cost as a primary filter. Third, opportunity cost. Most people evaluate a purchase or decision by asking, "Can I afford this?" Wealthy individuals ask a different question. What does saying yes to this cost me in terms of everything else I could do with this money, time, or attention instead? This sounds abstract, so let's make it concrete. Say someone has $50,000 in savings and is deciding whether to buy a car upgrade or leave the money invested. The average person calculates, do I have $50,000? Yes. Can I make the payments? Yes. Decision made. Someone trained in opportunity cost thinking asks a different question. If this $50,000 stayed invested for 20 years at a historical market average, what would it become? At roughly 8% average annual returns, $50,000 becomes approximately $233,000 in 20 years. So the real question isn't, can I afford the car? It's, is this car worth giving up $183,000 of future wealth? Sometimes the answer is still yes, but the decision is being made with full information instead of partial information. This single mental habit, running every major decision through an opportunity cost filter, is one of the most consistently cited differences between people who accumulate wealth and people who don't, regardless of income level. Shift 4. Identity-based money habits. The fourth shift is about identity, and this is where psychology really takes over from spreadsheets. Behavioral researchers have found that lasting financial habits rarely come from discipline alone. They come from identity. People who build wealth don't think I'm trying to save money. They think I am the kind of person who invests before I spend. That small linguistic shift changes everything, because willpower is a limited resource that depletes throughout the day. But identity doesn't need willpower. It just needs consistency with self-image. This is why so many self-made wealthy individuals describe their habits as automatic rather than effortful. They're not white-knuckling their way through discipline every single day. They built systems, automatic transfers, automatic investing, automatic boundaries around lifestyle inflation, so the decision only had to be made once at the identity level, rather than 100 times a year at the willpower level. Shift 5. Comfort with being misunderstood. The fifth and final shift is subtle but critical. A tolerance for being misunderstood, criticized, or looking wrong in the short term. Nearly every major wealth-building decision, buying an undervalued asset, starting a company nobody believes in yet, holding an investment through a downturn while everyone around you panics, requires doing something that looks foolish to other people at the time. This connects back to our cold open. I am not afraid to be wrong for a long time isn't really about investing. It's about psychological independence from the social approval of the crowd. Most people's financial decisions are secretly optimized to avoid looking foolish to friends, family, or coworkers, not to maximize long-term outcomes. Wealthy individuals have, consciously or not, decoupled their self-worth from other people's real-time opinions of their decisions. That's the mindset layer. 5 shifts: asymmetric risk, extended time horizon, opportunity cost filtering, identity-based habits, and tolerance for being misunderstood. Now let's see these patterns play out in real history, because these aren't new ideas. They're centuries old. Historical case studies. Let's look at 3 moments in history where this kind of thinking created enormous, lasting wealth, and just as importantly, moments where the absence of this thinking destroyed it. Case study 1, John D. Rockefeller and time horizon. John D. Rockefeller didn't become the wealthiest man in modern history through a single brilliant trade. He became wealthy through a multi-decade strategy of buying up refineries during downturns, specifically during the economic panics of 1873 and the 1880s, when other refinery owners were desperate to sell. While his competitors saw those downturns as disasters to escape, Rockefeller saw them as the exact moment predicted by his own long-term thinking. Assets go on sale and when everyone else is afraid. He wasn't guessing. He had built Standard Oil's internal systems, cost accounting, efficiency tracking, specifically so that he could survive downturns that bankrupted his less disciplined competitors. This is asymmetric risk, an extended time horizon working together. Rockefeller wasn't reckless. Historical accounts describe him as famously cautious and detail-oriented. But his caution was in service of surviving long enough to be the one still standing and buying when the panic ended. The lesson isn't buy oil refineries. The lesson is that downturns are not universally dangerous. They're dangerous for people without a long-time horizon and a survival-first structure, and they're opportunities for people with both. Case Study 2. The Vanderbilt family and the failure of identity-based habits. Now let's look at the other side, a cautionary case. Cornelius Vanderbilt built one of the largest fortunes in American history through shipping and railroads in the 1800s. By the time he died in 1877, he was worth more than the U.S. Treasury held in its vaults at the time. Within roughly one generation, most of that fortune was gone. Historians who've studied the Vanderbilt family's decline point to a specific pattern. The identity habits that built the fortune, thrift, aggressive reinvestment, tolerance for being seen as ruthless or unconventional, were not passed down. The heirs adopted an identity built around displaying wealth rather than compounding it. Massive mansions, extravagant parties, competitive spending among family members to prove status. This matches almost exactly what wealth psychologists find in modern research on multi-generational wealth. The mindset that builds wealth and the mindset that was never trained to sustain it are fundamentally different psychological postures. Money habits are downstream of identity. And if the next generation's identity is I am wealthy, rather than I am someone who builds and compounds, the money doesn't survive contact with that identity. Case Study 3. Modern venture capital and asymmetric bets. Let's bring this into the modern era. Venture capital, as an industry, is built almost entirely on asymmetric risk thinking. A venture fund typically expects that most of its investments will fail completely. Total loss of capital. The entire model depends on a small number of investments returning 50 times, 100 times, or more, covering all the losses and then some. Consider early investors in companies that became massive successes. The check sizes were often small relative to the fund, meaning the maximum loss was capped and known in advance, while the maximum gain was theoretically unlimited. This is shift 1, asymmetric risk, applied at an institutional scale. But here's what's less discussed: the psychological discipline required to sit through years of a portfolio company looking like a failure, doubling down, or holding steady while public sentiment says you made a bad bet, is exactly shift 5, tolerance for being misunderstood. Many of the most successful venture investors have described publicly being mocked or doubted for specific bets that took 5, 7, sometimes 10 years to prove out. So across nearly 150 years of financial history, from oil refineries to shipping empires to startup investing, the same underlying psychological patterns repeat. The tools change, The mindset doesn't. The practical framework. Now let's turn this into something you can actually use. Here is a 5-step framework, built directly from the shifts and case studies we just covered, that you can start applying this week, regardless of your current income or net worth. Step 1. Run the opportunity cost test on purchases. Over a set threshold. Pick a number. For many people, $200 to $500 is a reasonable starting threshold. For any purchase above that number, before buying, ask one question. If this money stayed invested for 20 years, at historical average returns, what would it become? You don't need to do the math from scratch every time. A rough shortcut. Money roughly doubles every 9 years at 8% average returns. So $1,000 today is roughly $2,000 in 9 years, $4,000 in 18 years. This isn't about never spending money. It's about spending with full information instead of partial information, which is exactly the shift wealthy decision makers make automatically. Step 2. Build one identity-based automatic system. Choose one financial behavior and automate it completely, so it never requires a daily willpower decision. The most common version, an automatic transfer into an investment account the day your income arrives, before you see the money in your spending account. The psychological principle here, straight from Shift 4, is that you want to make the wealth-building behavior the default, not the effortful exception. Once it's automatic, your identity naturally reshapes around it. You start to think of yourself as someone who already invests, rather than someone who's trying to save, because the behavior is already happening without a fight. Step 3. Define your risk asymmetry. Before you need it for any major financial or career decision, a job change, a business idea, an investment, write down 2 numbers before you decide: the realistic worst-case loss and the realistic best-case gain. Then ask, can I survive the worst case? And is the best case large enough to justify the risk of that worst case? This is Rockefeller's caution, applied personally. He wasn't fearless. He made sure Standard Oil could survive a downturn before he used a downturn to expand. Apply the same test to yourself before treating any risk as worth taking. Step 4. Practice being wrong in public in small doses. This one is uncomfortable, but it's trainable. Shift 5. Tolerance for being misunderstood isn't a personality trait some people are born with. It's a muscle. Start small. Make one investment or career decision you believe in. Tell one person about it, and hold your position even if they disagree, as long as your original reasoning still holds. The goal isn't stubbornness. If new information genuinely changes the picture, update your view. The goal is separating "I might be temporarily wrong in other people's eyes" from "I am wrong," which are 2 very different things that most people's brains treat as identical. Step 5. Review your time horizon. Once a quarter. Finally, once every 3 months, ask yourself one question about every major financial holding you have. Would I still hold this if I couldn't check its value for the next 10 years? If the honest answer is no, that's useful information. It tells you the position was based on short-term hope rather than long-term conviction. This single habit, reviewed quarterly, keeps you anchored to Shift 2, the extended time horizon, and prevents the slow drift back into short-term, reactive financial decision-making that most people fall into without noticing. So that's the framework: asymmetric risk, extended time horizon, opportunity cost filtering, identity-based habits, and tolerance for being misunderstood. 5 mental shifts tested across a century and a half of financial history, from Rockefeller's refineries to modern venture capital. None of this requires a finance degree. None of it requires starting capital most people don't have. What it requires is a different relationship with time, risk, and other people's opinions of your decisions. If this gave you a new way to think about your own money, subscribe to Insight Forge. Every week we break down the psychology behind wealth, decision-making, and the ideas that shape how the world actually works. And let me know in the comments, which of these 5 shifts is hardest for you personally? I read everyone. See you in the next video.